Hey, folks. What? First of all, up front, we're still dialing this in terms of trying to fix on a particular time frame to make it a little easier for people to participate. But um, we are live, so if you have questions, feel free to send them to me while I'm talking. I will try to address them. Also, for folks that are in contact with me, which is a huge number of people, and certainly probably everybody hearing this has the capacity to reach out and get to me one way or the other. If you've got suggestions on things that you want me to address and talk about and discuss, feel free to send them to me in advance via messenger, via whatever mechanism you have access to, and then I will try to fold those into what we're talking about, because a lot of what I'm doing now is in response to specific requests from people that want me to provide information on particular topics. So let's start off by talking about House Bill 300, which I think we've talked about previously. I know we've talked about previously. House Bill 300, so it's in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. It is introduced. It is in the House. It is not contemplated. This is not theoretical. This is happening right now. It's called the PA Fairness Act. All right. So as we've discussed before, the titles of these bills are deliberately chosen to sort of sound like, Mom, Apple Pie, Chevrolet. It's supposed to convey the impression that this is very wholesome and all American and so forth. I would say, as a default, you could just start by reading the title of the bill and then assuming that its actual intent is about 180 degrees out from what the title suggests. In other words, the more it sounds like, hey, this is a great thing and we ought to all pick up the flag and get behind it, the more it's something you really ought to look at with a very jaundiced eye. So House Bill 300, the PA Fairness Act. Okay. The description here, and I'm reading what I've got in my hand, are some documents I printed off from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is way out there these days on the fringe in terms of leftist ideology. And this is an article they wrote supporting the thing that I'm pulling from. So the description here is that it is intended to add explicit statutory protections from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. It is critically necessary to ensure protection from discrimination against LGBTQ people and to enshrine it in Pennsylvania law. So look, let's just be clear here. I certainly don't have any issue with people being allowed to live their lives as they choose. I think that's kind of the essence of the American sense of liberty, the right to be let alone. And I would suspect that the vast majority of people listening to this agree. But that's not what this bill does, right? What this bill is going to do is to make it illegal for there to be any distinctions or differences in the treatment of anyone based on their gender or their gender identity. And if you're not tracking with where we are in terms of development of this idea of gender identity, this is not like you're a guy and you have somehow fully physically transitioned to being a female. You have now all of the physical attributes, shall we say, of a female, and now you call yourself female. The state of play, if that's the right term on this, the state of the evolution of the ideology is such that if you declare that you are a gender, you must you must be treated as that gender. Therefore, in literally, if you're a guy and you declare that you are female, the the current philosophy is, the position is that no one can require any proof of that physical attributes are completely separate from your gender identity. You don't require anything else other than that declaration. So, to show you just how crazy this is, a little while back, I think roughly a month ago now, there was a weightlifting competition going on in the country of Iceland. Iceland, not a particularly big country and has a pretty small population, but produces this insane number of world-class weightlifters for whatever reason, combination of biology and socioeconomic things, or just, the popularity of the sport, whatever. The fact is, for this tiny little country, they produce this crazy number of world-class weightlifters. And there was a weightlifting championship going on in Iceland, and it was the women's weightlifting championship. And a guy had entered himself saying he was now a woman without any, I don't want to get lost in the grotesque details here, with surgical procedures that would go along with that declaration. He was in all physical, to all physical appearance, still a male, but said he was a woman. And therefore, because of this crazy ideology, this is the state of evolution of this ideology, this dude was allowed to compete, and he was blowing away his female competitors and well on his way to winning the championship. So there was a guy who was a former Icelandic weightlifting champion who was now a coach for one of the women in the competition, who saw this and was outraged by it and thought this is completely absurd, that this guy can just stand up and say, I feel like a woman and I get to lift against women. So he entered himself into the competition. This coach did, this former champion, entered himself into this competition as just saying, oh, well, guess what, guys, I feel like a woman too, so I'm in. And then easily defeated this mediocre male weightlifter that was dominating the whole thing. And the reason he did this was just to drive home how ludicrous this is. Like, this is insane. This is a women's weightlifting championship. And now we got two men competing for the championship. His hope was, I think, that everybody would recognize, okay, this is insane, and let's back away from this. Okay, whether he achieved that objective or not, I don't know. But my point in that is to say, this is where we are, right? If you think we are talking about transgender people only in the sense of somebody who has fully physically, hormonally transitioned, that is not at all what we're talking about. So back to 300, PA Fairness Act. If you think about society, while we strive for equality in the sense of opportunity and treatment, we do not, in fact, function as a society where everybody is treated exactly the same. Men walk into the men's room, women walk into the women's room, the girls go to girls' gym class, the guys to guys' gym class. They compete separately in sports. They are treated differently in a whole variety of ways for very, very good reasons. I mean, in regard to public facilities, to begin with, safety, right? So when you're a woman and you go to the gym to work out, you don't find yourself having to stand naked next to a 6'4", 250-pound guy, also nude, or shower with him in a public facility and just sort of trust that this is all going to turn out okay. This is before we get to issues of privacy and modesty and so forth. This act, House Bill 300, the PA Fairness Act, kills that. It eliminates that. It destroys that. It makes it illegal for anybody in the state of Pennsylvania to enforce distinctions as I just described, common sense, traditional distinctions. There's a whole separate dimension to this, and that is what happens to religious institutions, for instance, that have their own rules based on their scripture, based on, and we're not just talking Christian denominations, could be all faiths, that have certain beliefs about men and women, uh, all associated again with their religion and their faith. In addition to how they would have to conduct things at, say, their schools or at their church services, this potentially means they have to hire people who espouse transgender ideology, guys who dress as women, all of this. Folks who, again, nobody's denying them the right to live their lives. But if their beliefs are completely contrary to that of the religious faith, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that the church or the temple ought to be required to employ them. This bill, House Bill 300, makes that illegal. Following on this, you're going to instantaneously have the lawsuits from the transgender guy who claims he wasn't hired by name a church, name a religion. Okay. This thing is being fast tracked. It ain't somebody's crazy dream. It isn't a theory. It isn't off somewhere in the wilderness. This thing is being pushed aggressively in the House, which is under Democratic control. So if you're on board with this, you don't need to lift a finger. If anything I've said to you bothers you, you need to be screaming bloody murder. And those of you that are in groups need to be doing something organized against this. All right, let's shift to Senate Bill 400. Senate Bill 400, also talked about earlier. This is an open primary bill. This is in the Senate. This is a live bill. It is in committee. Okay, it is being pushed by a number of prominent Republicans. Now, whether it gets out of the Senate or not, I don't know. But this bill is designed to import into the primary process independents and unaffiliated individuals. So if you're a GOP voter, this bill passes. When you go to the primary, choose your candidate, and you're somebody like Doug Mastriano, you're going to find that your vote is now being diluted, potentially negated, by the fact that a boatload of folks who are not even in the Republican Party are now allowed to participate in choosing that candidate. And this is expressly what's intended to do. This is a MAGA killing bill. This is to kill the Patriot movement in Pennsylvania by taking away its stream. Now, I've talked to a bunch of folks about this, and what they all say is, don't worry about it. It's not going to leave the Senate. It's in Chris Dush's committee, Senator Chris Dush's committee. He's not going to let it out. Look, I'm just going to remind you that Chris Dush is the guy who also swore to you that he was going to investigate the 2020 election and deliver a report. I'm also going to remind you that you have mail-in voting in the state of Pennsylvania pursuant to Act 77, which was shoved through both houses of the legislature when they were both under Republican control and when Republican leadership had sworn forever that they were committed to in-person voting. They turned around and ordered everybody to vote for mail-in voting. The Republican leadership did it. So if you're sleeping well at night based on the fact that you think the Republican leadership in Harrisburg is going to stop this from ever becoming a reality, God bless you if that helps you sleep. I don't share your optimism. Okay. Let me bootstrap off that just to close on one other point here, which is talking to folks around the state. I'm hearing all the time that they've had a conversation with name a Republican politician, and that Republican politician has assured them of X, Y, and Z and said all sorts of soothing, wonderful things to them. And based on that, they're sure that everything's going to be okay. On some level, I guess I don't know what to say at that point. I mean, I'm almost speechless, which is hard for me. Talk is cheap. And I don't think anybody out there lives their life in a way where they just accept blanket assurances from people, which are in complete contradiction to the physical evidence. And then they feel good about it, right? Your car's been in the shop for something that should have taken 24 hours. It's been in there for a month. And every time you talk to the mechanic, he just smiles and tells you it's all great and he's got it knocked. I mean, at some point you begin to think maybe this guy's lying to me, man. Maybe, I mean, in business, the same kind of thing. Your whole life is like that. Okay, look, talk is cheap, man. Back this up. Where's the action? We are constantly receiving soothing sounding noises, smoke, mirrors, parlor tricks. This is what politicians do. And all I can say to you is, forget all of that. The answer is you want to know where somebody is. Look at what they have done. All right. I'll give you a couple of examples. Senator Dave Argall, right? This is a guy there's a lot of focus on now about potentially trying to get him out of office. Okay. Argall is now running around in regard to open primaries, which we just discussed, claiming that he opposes them. He will never support these things. Don't worry about it. Trust me, man. Right? There's no way. That's a crazy idea. Look, this bill came up for a vote before, or at least not this exact bill, but a bill with the same proposal to open primaries. Back in 2019, it actually came to a vote. Argall voted for open primaries in 2019. Let me say that again. Senator Argall voted for open primaries in 2019. And now he's running around with a straight face telling you, trust me, I completely oppose this idea. Now, maybe the guy changed his mind. Maybe he genuinely is in a different place. I don't know. But if so, he needs to explain that. If so, he needs to explain how it is that his verbiage right now contradicts the fact as a fact, as a matter of record, a vote on the record. He voted for this same concept in 2019. Okay. Argall is the chair of the Education Committee. Now, all sorts of people, including Phoenicia Redmond, to great effect, have testified about all kinds of issues in our schools. I mean, the critical race theory and so forth, but let's just start with pornography in our schools. Completely age inappropriate material. Nobody's talking about banning books, burning books, preventing people from writing books. All they're saying is if I got a graphic novel with full page color spreads of two teenage boys engaged in sex, probably shouldn't be in my middle school library so my 10-year-old can check it out, especially without my knowledge, right? And it seems like a pretty common sense thing. You can't provide pornographic materials to little kids, cut the parents out. This is, again, not burning books, banning books, any of the other crazy stuff people want to say. It's just saying my 10-year-old doesn't need to see this, and I'll decide as the parent what my 10-year-old does get to see, by the way. Okay. Argall's the point man on all of this. Now, you tell me if there's anybody out there who can tell me what Dave Argall is currently doing about any of this, how he's lifted a finger to change anything on any of these issues. And we could go down the same road on critical race theory or a million other topics. Nothing. So I don't care what the guy says. And if you're just going to listen to verbiage from people like this, and accept that in contradiction of the facts, in contradiction of the record, I don't know what to say. Brian Cutler, right? One of the most powerful Republicans in the state representative. This is the guy who only months ago lined up 15 other Republicans, crossed party lines, and voted to install a Democratic Speaker of the House. He did that, by the way, behind the back of his own caucus. They literally went into caucus behind closed doors, the Republican members of the House, back when they were trying to select a speaker, and the Republicans still had the majority. And they agreed to support a representative from Westmoreland County. And then Cutler walked out on the floor, having made a secret deal with the Dems. Him and 15 other Republicans crossed over, completely blindsided the rest of the caucus, the rest of the Republicans, and voted to install a Democratic speaker, who immediately locked out the House of Representatives and shut down state government, effectively, the legislature anyway, until such time as the Democrats had a majority. This guy, Cutler, is still running around with a straight face looking at his constituents and telling them that they should vote for him as a Republican representative because he represents their interests in Harrisburg. Now, the bottom line is you got to make a choice. You can either believe that kind of rhetoric coming from Argall and Cutler and God knows how many more, or you can hold their feet to the fire, look at what they've actually done, and then hold them accountable. That's on you. See you soon.